The More Things Change, written by Paul F. Olson, read by Scott MacDonald. 1. Circumstances. First, the sun didn't set. Then there was the day that all the deer showed up in town. Then all the books in the local library became juvenile coloring books. Then the river reversed itself and began flowing northward. Then, perhaps the cruelest cut of all, that horrible week when our TVs would only play for 5 minutes every hour, reverting for the other 55 to blank snow. Today the sky is green. Yesterday it was pink. I'm betting on yellow tomorrow. We used to think it was the end of the world, but now I guess we know better. An author we had to read in high school, in the days long before the prudes got him banned from the required reading list, said it best, I think. He said, "Hi-ho." Now that could mean a lot of things, but I always took it to mean that life just goes on no matter what. That author's name was Kurt Vonnegut. I've been rereading his stuff lately, in the wee hours of the night. He's become my personal prophet in this new age. There was a town meeting this morning, the first since those wild early days when Mrs. McCardle was stirring folks up with her talk of end times and the revelation to John. This meeting was different. The mayor, whose beard had begun to grow on the inside of his cheeks, making him look like a late-autumn chipmunk and sound like the Godfather after a hit of really good acid, stood before the town council and the electorate with a chubby, paternal frown. "My friends," he said, "I'm sorely troubled by the amount of wagering that's going on these days, this betting on all the changes in our world." We said something, I'm not sure what, but it was appropriately non-committal. Why, I understand that the line at Jerry Winkler's Rexall this morning was 27 people wrong. What's more, I understand that none of those fine people were there to buy film or pick up a prescription. They were there because Jerry was giving good odds on maroon as the sky color tomorrow. Now, friends, the world has altered, but need I remind any of you that we're still a society of law and order? Must you be told to hang on to your rationality and reject any hints of barbarism? Do you need to be reminded that gambling of any sort is still illegal? If we allow ourselves to be drawn into this web of cynicism and greed..." His voice had become more intense, nearly impossible to understand. His eyes were flashing with preacher's fire, but a few of us didn't much feel like being saved and slipped out the back door of the council chambers. "What do you think?" George Hoover said as we started walking uptown. "You think Winkler's right? Gonna be maroon tomorrow?" I shrugged. I've got $10 on yellow myself, at 7-1, but I can afford it. I won big on the falling trees pool last week. Ken Tatum grunted. "You were damn lucky. Who would have believed all of Fisher's Woods would go at once like that?" A bear rode by on a big Harley. We waved. The bear gave us the finger. "Jesus Christ, I'm tired of this crap," Ken said. "Bears flipping us off. I gotta tell you, boys, I'm sick of all this bourgeois." I left them at the corner and went on home, past what used to be respectable houses full of respectable people. Now there was something wrong with every one of them. Or maybe I shouldn't say wrong. You see, my values have been changing lately. While I used to have a rigid set of moral ideas, I'm finding it harder to believe there's any such thing as right or wrong left anymore. Different then. I think that says it best. Brian Forrester's place has portholes now, instead of windows. His siding, which used to be a normal, if not very flashy white, is now a vivid, shocking green. Roger Chalmers' place has a flurry of shrubbery growing out of the roof. Mrs. Davis's place no longer has a front door. Where the door used to be is an amateurish painting of a flamingo smoking a cigar and wearing a Budweiser cap. The painting is done on a swatch of green silk, and every time Mrs. Davis rips it down in anger, it appears again within a few hours. But the most different of all, is poor Roy Hooper's house. No doors or windows, just bright red siding, a steel roof of bright and glaring blue. None of us have seen Roy in the last 2 months. Our repeated attempts to get into his place have proved fruitless. That house of his is impregnable. Different. Yes, sirree. If that's not different, I don't know what is. 2. The conjecture. My doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, but I didn't recognize it right away. It went ding-dong, the way it always used to. But that was a bit of a surprise. For the last 3 weeks or so, it had been chiming the Georgia Tech fight song. I opened the door and saw Ken Tatum out there with Buddy Mills and Carl Brinkley. I hadn't seen Carl lately and noticed right away that he had a nasty bruise underneath his left eye, no doubt from that violent, drunken bitch he's married to. The bruise wasn't really what I noticed, though. I mean, I saw it, but it was no big deal. Carl always has a shiner, or a lump, or a cut. What I noticed was that this particular bruise was a bright banana yellow color, like gaudy clown makeup. I nodded at everyone. "How do, gentlemen?" "Not good, Alvin," Buddy said. "Can we come in?" "Of course you can." I stepped back from the door and ushered them through. Let me get you all a beer." I passed out cold Strohs all around. But when we opened the cans, we found them full of fruit punch. Except for Ken, that is. He had some kind of cola. "We got to talk," Buddy said. "We've been hashing this over all day, and we think we got this thing knocked." I figured he was talking about the changes, but the rest of it I didn't understand. "Just what do you mean by knocked?" I asked. "Well, Alvin, we got it knocked, licked, figured out." "Is that so?" I smiled. If I had a nickel for every time I'd heard that lately, I'd be wealthy. Especially since those nickels probably would have turned into gold pieces by now. "Tell me what you figured out." Carl leaned forward, his shiner gleaming. "Jock Bartholomew," he said softly. The name threw me. "Jock? What about him?" Ken flashed a sad frown. "I'm disappointed in you, Alvin. Truly I am. You're just about the smartest fella in town. Don't you see the connection?" I shook my head. "Afraid not." "When did Bartholomew move here?" "I don't know. 3, 4 months ago, April, I'd say." "And when did all these changes start?" "I remember that exactly," I said. "The middle of May. It was Mother's Day, the day the sun didn't go down." Ken leaned back with a smug look. "You see?" I was afraid I did, but something inside me wanted to play it ignorant a little longer. "What are you getting at?" "Jesus," Carl said. "It's Bartholomew. He's behind everything." "Look at the evidence," Buddy told me. He pronounced it evidence. You ever known a stranger man than old Jock? He lives out there on the Blackwater Road all by his lonesome, hardly ever comes to town. When he does, he buys a lot of them natural foods and shit like that, and he even buys a lot of—" He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was low and whispery. "A lot of books, them paperbacks from over to the Rexall, and whenever anyone sees him out in the woods, he's jogging. Jogging, for Christ's sakes!" "Not only that," Ken added, "but what did he move here for, anyhow? That's what I want to know. He don't know nobody in town." "Well, that part's easy," I said. "That cabin belonged to his uncle. You fellas remember him, Pete Bracken? He used to go fishing with us. He used the place every summer for 30 years, and when he died last winter, he left it to Jock." "And how would you know that?" Carl said. "How would you know when none of us ever heard it?" I shrugged. The fact that Jock and I had become good friends over the last few months wasn't such a big deal, but suddenly it didn't seem like the time to mention it. "Heard it around, I guess." "Well," Ken said, "I don't care if he's related to the goddamn Queen of England. It's too much to be coincidence." He broke off suddenly after taking a healthy swallow of his beer cola. He coughed and grimaced and swallowed with great effort. "This crap just turned into vodka." Buddy grunted. "You see, Alvin, that bastard Bartholomew, he's got witchy powers. Why, I'll bet you he's listening in on us right now. He knows we're onto him, so he's going to make it tough. Shit. Everyone knows Ken can't hold his vodka." I got up and paced across the room. This didn't make sense. For months we'd been living with the changes in our town. For months we'd accepted everything that came our way with good grace and a fair measure of humor. Well, sure, there were the bad apples, like old Mrs. McCardle, but they were the exceptions. The rest of us had learned to roll with the punches. Hi-ho, and all of that. Occasionally, some fool would try to escape, but when the roads changed on him, circled around, and returned him to the town limits, that person would learn to go with the flow, just like the rest of us. Then why the sudden reversal, I wondered? Why this new effort to pin blame? I sighed, remembering the hints of growing anger I'd seen lately. A fist fight over last week's falling trees pool. Some bullet holes discovered in the welcome sign on the edge of town, which had just lately been reading E=mc². People claiming, in soft voices, to be fed up. Like Ken this morning, saying, "I'm tired of this crap. I'm sick of all this bourgeois." I suppose everyone reaches a breaking point after a while. In the final accounting, the best excuse for any of our actions is that we're only human. When we reach the point past which we can't or don't care to venture, well, then we want to strike back. "What do you plan to do with this information?" I asked. "Simple," Carl said. "We're going to pay a visit to the bastard, make him fess up. As soon as he does that, we'll have Mike Weathers lock him in jail. Or maybe we'll go one better and just string him up ourselves." I frowned. "And if he tells you he's innocent?" "That's easy," Buddy said with a laugh. "He does that, we'll string the lying witch up for sure. Just for spite, you know." He hesitated, smiled, and laughed again. "Just for spite." 3. The conversation. I had been to Jock Bartholomew's cabin perhaps 5 times in all. Mostly we did our socializing when we'd meet out in the woods. I'd be cruising along on one of the walks Dr. Barker told me to take, or maybe heading off to one of my favorite fishing holes, and I'd run into him jogging. Except Jock didn't call it jogging. To him it was always running. And Mr. Man, did he take it seriously, I hope to tell you. He was a former high school track star who had also done quite well in the mile during his college years at one of the Ivy League schools. Although those days were long since past, he had spent the years in between bouncing around as a ranger for the National Park Service, a sometime high school teacher, a freelance journalist, a photographer, a potter, and now a newborn wilderness dweller and oil painter. He still lived for his long daily runs. Even though I knew the Blackwater Road well, it still took me a fair amount of time to get to his cabin that day. I hadn't been there in at least a month, and there had been plenty of changes. No matter where I looked, I kept seeing things that made me stop and take a second glance. There was the trailer that belonged to Joe and Ellen Friedrich. It used to be a regular old silver Airstream, but now its silvery hue was dull and reddish. After a moment, I realized I was looking at what might be the world's only house trailer made out of brick. Or then there was the grove of trees growing upside down, leafy crowns buried in the earth, roots waving in the air. Or the little waterfall on the side of the road, Drake Falls, we locals called it, that was running backwards. The steady flow rising like a charmed snake out of the water pools, slithering 10 feet straight up the rocks and vanishing back into the woods. Or the sign marking Buckhaven Road that now said Berlin, 140 kilometers. Or the squirrel that came up to me and asked, in a fine French accent too, I might add, for directions to town. That made my mouth drop open in astonishment, and that made the little critter laugh. When I hurried off, I could swear I heard the beast singing "Do You Know the Way to San Jose" in a pleasant high voice, like Wayne Newton during his glory days, if you know what I mean. I got to Jock's place an hour after leaving home. It's a trip that normally wouldn't take more than 30, maybe 35 minutes. "Alvin, it's good to see you. What brings you all the way out here?" He had his easel set up near the cabin, and there he was, perched on his stool, trying to capture the big oak that stood at the northwest corner of his property. "Howdy, Jock. It's nice to see you, too. You want a beer? I picked up a fresh case yesterday." He started to rise, but I waved him back down. "We've got to talk," I said. It's about the changes." He grinned. "Ah, you've returned for some more of my crackpot Dartmouth philosophy." He put his brushes aside and made himself comfortable. I ambled over and looked at his painting. It was fine, although that weird greenish sky that had been hanging over us all day had played hell with the tones. "Very nice," I said absently. "And no, I'm afraid it's not philosophy I'm after today." His eyebrows went up. "Oh, no, it's something else. You know, we've talked about the changes a lot. You mentioned the way it might be the last punishment of an angry god, or maybe just the, what did you call it? The vivid manifestation of a universe gone mad. I'll tell you straight, Jock, that stuff's over my head. But in a crazy kind of way, it made sense to me. I've got no trouble believing it could be either of those things, or any of 100 others, and I like the other thing you said about how maybe it was all part of a test, a cosmic exam. Do you remember that? We were sitting at Pike Lake when you came up with that one. You said our humanity was being tested, and to pass, we had to hold up under the pressure. "Yes," Jock said, smiling. "I remember." I think I like that answer best of all. I mean, I don't know how to fight against an angry God, and I sure don't know anything about universes going crazy. But a test I can handle. I can take the pressure. I can fight the strain. That's a snap. I know how to keep on keeping on. Jock looked troubled. He had picked up on the worried note in my voice. He might have seen something in my face. I'm not sure. Alvin, he said. Well, that's wrong. It's some of the other fellas in town, I told him. They don't care about God and tests and all that. All of a sudden, they have their own ideas. They came to my place a little while ago to tell me they've got the changes all figured out. Yes, I said. And I told him. As I talked about what Buddy and the others had said, Jack grew noticeably pale. At one point, he picked up a paintbrush and held it lightly between his thumb and index finger. I could see it trembling. When I was finished, he turned a sad-eyed gaze on me. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then, softly, he said, You don't believe them, do you? The hell no. Whatever else happens, we're still friends. And even if we weren't, well, good Lord, I know nonsense when I hear it. He sighed. Thank you for that. You've got to understand something, I said, rushing on in a lame attempt to explain. The way it is with outsiders and newcomers in a small town, they're just naturally under suspicion. And you don't act like most of the folks around here. Your reading and all that running you do, it's... For God's sakes, Alvin, I know all about all that. I was prepared for it when I moved here. But if you ask me, there's a pretty big difference between second glances in the hardware store and accusing someone of witchcraft. What next? Assuming they don't string me up, as they so quaintly put it, what's their next move? I sold some paintings at that little craft shop on Winthrop Street last week. Are they going to storm the place and rip those paintings off the wall, burn them in the street? Truth to tell, I thought they very well might. I had seen those paintings. They were wonderful representations of the way the town looked with all the changes. The strange skies, the funny houses, even some of the people. Like the mayor with his inside-out beard. It wasn't unrealistic to suppose that Buddy Mills and the others would interpret those pictures as admissions of guilt, Jock's way of boasting about the things he had done. But I didn't see any point in saying that. Not then. It doesn't matter, I said. What's important is to get you out of here before they come rushing in all half-cocked and do something that can't be taken back. He was trembling again. What do you propose? There's a road, I said. I drove down it a few weeks ago, just for a look around. Things are pretty strange out there. I saw a house made out of something that looked like cotton candy and a car that I'm pretty sure had feet instead of wheels. But I kept driving, and I got almost all the way to Dollarton before everything went topsy-turvy and I found myself back here. Dollarton, Jock. That's almost 30 miles away, and more than twice as far as you can get on any of the other roads. I think we ought to try going down there again. I don't like the idea of running, he said. Perhaps if I met with your friends and explained. Believe me, they're not in the mood for explanations, and if you tried any of your philosophy on them, they'd string you up for sure. Think for a minute. They want to hang you because things have gone wacky around here. But that's not the real reason. When you boil it down, they're after you because you're different, because you go running in the woods, and because you like to paint. Men who take those things as lynching offenses can't be reasoned with. We've got to run. Later, if things ever calm down, we can come back and try talking sense to them. He didn't say anything for a time, but finally nodded and allowed me to lead him into the cabin. He pulled a suitcase from under the cot on which he slept, and together we began packing whatever clothes we could find. We had really only gotten started when we heard the mob coming down the Blackwater Road. 4. The confrontation. "You, witch, come on out. We want to talk to you." They were out there ringing the cabin, 20 or 30 strong, their babbling voices blended into a shrewish chorus. But I could hear Buddy Mills' voice cutting clearly above all the rest. "Yo, come on out." When I peeked through a chink in the cabin wall, I could see pale and angry faces. I could see hands clenched into fists. I could see sunlight glinting off gleaming rifle barrels. I was amazed at how rapidly things had happened. One minute you have a couple of friends batting around a crazy idea. The next, you're on the edge of something irrevocable. This morning things had been normal, or at least as normal as they had been for the last few months. We had been talking and laughing as buddies, watching armies of deer trot down the main street, ducking out of the way of motorcycle-riding bears, lining up at the Rexall to bet on the sky color. There had been some baffled amusement in our voices, a touch of weariness, perhaps even a trace of fear. But there hadn't been anger. Not anger like this. I suppose I had been deluding myself. I had been pretending that if I just kept moving straight ahead, if I waited for the mad universe to find its sanity once again, if I read enough Vonnegut and kept the faith. Well, I guess I had figured that if I did all of those things, I'd wake up someday and find everything back to normal. The bottom line? I had supposed that if I just kept laughing long enough and hard enough, that invisible cosmic comedian would tire and move on to find a new audience somewhere else. What I hadn't noticed was that while I was busy laughing, a subtle line had been crossed. My friends, it seemed, had been nurturing something much darker than laughter. "We're trapped," Jock whispered. I shook my head. "No, I'm going out there. I'll talk to them. With any luck, that'll bring the ones out back around to the front. I'll keep them busy. You slip out that back way and head into the woods. Wait for me at Pike Lake. I'll meet you there later and show you that road to Dollarton." "Oh, then they'll kill you." "No, they won't. They won't much like that I'm here, and they'll hate me when I tell them I'm your friend, but they know me. They trust me. Or they used to, at any rate. I'll be able to stall them long enough for you to escape." Jock sighed. He still looked pale, but who could blame him? Like all of us, his life had been turned upside down lately. But for him, it was worse than that. Today, his life had just been flipped over again, and in a hell of a big way. "All right, we'll try it." Outside, Buddy Mills raised his voice above the crowd again. "God damn it, Witch, get out here right now. You got 5 minutes before we blow our way in there." Jock hurried to finish packing. While he gathered his things together, I wandered around the cabin, looking at his books and canvases. I walked over to the fireplace and studied the collection of aging track trophies on the mantel. I picked one up and read the inscription. "Osborne High School, track team all-around champion 1963, Jock Thomas Bartholomew." It wasn't fair. The man liked to run. He liked to paint. He liked the solitude of the woods. He liked to read, as I did. All he wanted was the chance to start a new quiet life in a new quiet place. The cosmic test? The cosmic joke? And in the grand tradition of mankind, we had turned the joke back on ourselves. 2 minutes later, Jock signaled that he was ready. I put the trophy down and pulled in a deep breath. I nodded. A moment later, I went out to face the crowd. I suppose you're thinking that they tore me apart out there, but they didn't. Once they got over being stunned by my presence at the cabin, they seemed surprisingly ready to listen, at least in the beginning. I told them honestly that Jock and I were friends. I also said that I thought what they were doing was small-minded and cruel and insane, and I told them that I'd come to warn Jock of their asinine intentions. After that, I ventured off into the land of lies, stating that I'd found the cabin empty when I got there, that Jock had obviously run away some time earlier. "I knew it," Carl Brinkley said. "That proves he's a witch. The bastard knew we was coming. He got away before we could punish him." I shook my head sadly. "He isn't a witch, Carl. He's a man just like you and me." "The hell he is," Buddy said. "Men like you and me don't make shrubs grow out of Roger Chalmers' roof. They don't make the fish in the river turn red and blue. They don't make the sky look like a Vegas neon sign, or at least men like me don't." He gave me a long, steady stare. "I don't know about you anymore, Alvin." The crowd gave a low, rumbling murmur. "What's the matter with you?" I asked. "What made you turn all of a sudden? This morning we were getting along fine. We sat together and laughed while Mayor Chipmunk scolded us for gambling. Nobody was talking about witches then." "We're tired," somebody said. "We're decent people. We'll take the crap someone throws at us for a while. We'll stand for being pushed around a little. But eventually you push back," I said, remembering my very thoughts on that subject earlier. "I can understand that. Believe me, I can. Do you think I like what's been happening here? Watching my dog stand up on two legs and run away from me? Listening to my doorbell play that damn Rambling Wreck song? Trying to rescue poor Roy Hooper from that fortress he's trapped in? Do you think I've enjoyed that?" "You've been laughing a lot through all of it," Ken Tatum observed. "So have you. Jesus, so have all of you. We had to laugh or go insane. That's what the betting was for, wasn't it? That's why we had the sky pools and the falling trees pool. Just how did you win that tree pool, Elvin?" Buddy said softly. And the crowd murmured again. Somewhere, 2 or 3 rows back in the throng, I heard the click of someone snapping off the safety on his gun. That was all it took. I bolted and ran. I scrambled around the side of the cabin and darted into the woods before they had even absorbed the fact that I was gone. But once they absorbed it, they took to the chase with fierce enthusiasm. 5. The consequences. I found Jock waiting at Pike Lake, just as we'd planned. We took to the woods together, running as fast as we could, while the angry townspeople, my old friends, I kept thinking, followed. We ran up hills that hadn't been there before, and past thick stands of pine that were coated with glistening sleeves of shining silver. We jumped over creeks of bright yellow water and scurried past animals that waved at us or swore in perfect English at being disturbed. On and on, farther and farther we ran, until the green sky darkened, and the pinpricks of red and purple stars had appeared overhead. The world had changed, I thought. Not right or wrong, not better or worse, just different. Perhaps we would get to Dollarton and find normality and control. Or maybe we'd get there and find that it, too, had changed, that the whole world had been affected. Or maybe, just maybe, we'd never get there at all. We had to face that possibility, I knew. But we also had to keep going, keep trying. After several long and painful hours, even Jock, the expert runner, was fading. We tried to cheer each other on, but it was difficult. Our bodies ached, and our lungs burned. No matter how fast we went, or which direction we ran, the hunters stayed close behind. The world had changed, yes, and we all cope with change in our own ways. Some of us laugh, some of us paint, some of us run. Maybe, somewhere, there was someone writing new songs about all the differences. We read, we talk, and some gather in angry clusters to look for the solution. Changes. No matter how drastic the movement of the world, there are always a few things that resist it, some elements that cannot be altered. The spirit of man, the fate of the different, on and on into the night. Hi-ho! The mob howled in the darkness like wolves. You've been listening to The More Things Change, written by Paul F. Olson, read for you by Scott McDonald. Thanks for listening.